MFA, multi-factor authentication, it drives me crazy because sometimes it's a lot. I have to go put in the password, then I gotta go to another app and I gotta get the code. It's a lot, but it does keep cyber criminals from just gaining that first initial access into your accounts, and it blocks them from getting access to sensitive data anywhere else.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Fosivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hello. You're listening to the Mindful Business Security Show. I'm your host, Accidental CISO. If you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you found us. And if you've listened before, welcome back. We're deviating from our normal call in radio format to bring you something that I think small business owners and leaders everywhere will find extremely valuable. This episode will be full of security awareness training content for small businesses. If your organization doesn't already have some sort of security awareness training content, this could even serve as your annual security awareness training session if you share it with your team. Before we go on, I have to say it. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app. Also, as a call in radio show, we always need callers for the show. If you have questions, be sure to visit the show page to submit your question to sign up to be a caller on a future episode. My guest today is a penetration tester turned entrepreneur as the founder of her own consulting firm. She has spent over a decade in tech, and in that time has helped others, especially those in underrepresented groups, break into the cybersecurity field. Along the way, she has shared her journey on social media, including a YouTube channel where she helps viewers discover their strengths, build an online presence, and provides inspiration for other aspiring cybersecurity professionals. When she isn't helping her clients solve cybersecurity problems, she's setting personal records in the gym where she deadlifts 250 pounds, squats 200, and benches 90. I couldn't do any of that. I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast, the Digital Empress, Tailor Tolliver.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is awesome. We've known each other for several years on social media, and I'm glad to have a chance to bring you on here and have you share some of your expertise with folks.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I see a lot of cyber folks these days getting into strength training, and very few of them, though, have been nearly as dedicated as you've been. When did you get into the sport, and what has kept you so motivated?
It started after I had my kid in 2021. I think me getting pregnant tripped off something insane in my brain. Carrying around a baby, that's strength training in itself because you're carrying around so much weight. And I think that after pregnancy, I was like, I'm not carrying around this weight anymore. Let me go find something else to carry around. So started getting in the gym a year after having my kid and found this fitness app Ladder. Shout out to them. And I started training with them. And it's been 3 years this month that I've been training with them. And now I can lift very heavy weight like a psycho.
That's awesome. I see you post stuff on Blue Sky and stuff about progress and that kind of stuff, and your progress has been really, really incredible. And not only are you now like a cybersecurity expert,
Mhm.
like people are looking to you now as an expert in the fitness space too, which is pretty cool.
Yes. Yes. It helps keep me going on the cyber side because you can get very stressed out. So the strength training and being in fitness, helps to balance all of that. It's not only helping me, yeah, and it's helping everyone that I'm encouraging to get into strength training. So it's been great.
You've had an incredible amount of ambition and focus, and you're not only applying that to your athletic pursuits, but also to your work in cyber as a cyber professional.
Hmm.
What led to you starting your own consulting practice? Because I know like that's really scary to a lot of folks.
It is. Um, it was actually, just getting into the industry early on. And that's when I started my degree program and I did a lot of networking events and I was going and talking to people that were already in the industry. And I started to notice that a lot of people own their own businesses, their own consulting firms. And then we met and then I found out you ran your own business and brought me on and, showed me the ropes in GRC and stuff like that. So it was just being around a lot of people and networking and communicating with a lot of people that were already doing it. And so that inspired me to start my own, which is also very scary because I'm a woman and on top of that, a black woman. So I was like, why not? It's already scary. I'm already going through it. Let me just go the extra mile. And it has inspired other people in my demographic to do the same thing. So far, it's been very rewarding. It's been everything that I could have dreamed of, and I'm learning a lot more, not just from the security side, but the business side as well.
It's been neat to see as well, bringing your pen testing background, but expanding to cover GRC work, the
Hmm.
governance risk and compliance work as well. Because a lot of times folks do one or the other, and it's not all that common to see somebody do both and be good at both.
You actually encouraged me to do that. Yeah, you were like, "Yeah, you should do both. You should look into both." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, why not?"
I think it's probably going to be your superpower in your consulting practice.
Thank you.
So, as you're working with your clients, what kind of things you've been helping them with lately? And like, are you seeing any mistakes that those organizations kind of are consistently making that you have to help them fix?
I think a lot of it so far is just educating them and bringing awareness like we are, and us having to take the time out and have the patience to educate them on why their devices are behaving a certain way. As far as mistakes, it would be them maybe not having a password manager or them having the same password for multiple different accounts, giving too much access and too much privileges to the wrong person within their business, and ultimately just not having security implemented at all. They didn't even think to invest into it until they get breached, and then from there we have to educate them even more on why they need an IR plan, why they need password managers, why they need 24/7 detection and monitoring on their business. So a lot of it has to just do with educating them from start to the end.
Everybody seems to want to do the right thing, and they're just not sure what to do. It's not their area of expertise. Their area of expertise is running their business
Yes.
and you know their thing. And so, yeah, the training and educating, I see that a lot in my practice too. Is just explaining things, helping folks know and understand. Obviously they understand it's important. They wouldn't be working with us
Yeah.
already if it wasn't important.
Hmm.
If they didn't at least understand that it was important. People that don't think that it's important don't go and find cyber consultants to come help them.
Until it's too late.
uh, yeah, until it's too
Yeah.
late. So it's just a matter of educating. I like that. Before we jump to the rest of the show, I want to ask this question. I ask this of every guest host that comes on the show, and I love hearing the wide variety of answers that everybody gives because their own background and perspectives sort of color their answer to this. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you say. If you had a magic wand and you could wave this magic wand in the air and just instantly have every small business owner, small business leader instantly know and understand something about security, what would that one thing be?
That they should always be thinking about security and investing security before their business blows up. Whereas if they would have thought about investing in security from the ground up, it wouldn't be as much of a problem in the long run. Yeah, I know that they're small and, revenue is, they have to budget and, save money. Just simple things, just reaching out to someone for like a simple security plan or advice, just seeking that out and investing little amounts over time until they're able to get a large team or invest in a whole team of security professionals.
Excellent point that just being proactive is so huge. And it doesn't have to be a big bang, like that incremental approach and just continuing to just do what you can a little bit at a time and continue to mature instead of thinking you have to do it all at once. So, we don't have any callers on the show today. Again, since this is kind of a special episode, but we do have a bit of a security awareness training course prepared. Are you ready to dive in and teach our listeners about how to protect themselves and their businesses from cyber criminals?
Absolutely.
All right, let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
So we started actually talking a little bit about this just a moment ago when I was asking about, the one thing that you wanted folks to understand and some of the mistakes that you see folks making in small businesses. Something that I hear a lot is sort of this attitude from small business owners that, like, we're too small to be a target. We're not a target. This isn't important. But it is, because I see too many small businesses still have breaches and have security incidents. So it does affect them. Why are small businesses still targets, even though they're not large, well known enterprises?
That's typically due to them not having educational security, not a large budget, like I mentioned before. And because they're not educated on security, that makes them a prime target. The small business may not have any MFA set up. They may not know how to set that up. They may not know that they need to set that up. They could have unpatched software that we could exploit. They could have weak remote access controls, just overall weak security controls. And it makes them an easier target rather than a big corporation that has all of that in place. So that's why I mentioned, as something I would like to wave a magic wand and fix, to start with those small incremental steps in the beginning, so that they can protect themselves beforehand, because we're thinking, okay, they're a small business. Where can I start? What's the easiest open door that I can get in?
A open door is a kind of a great way to say it. Like, the cyber criminals are opportunistic, and if you leave your door unlocked or you leave your door open, somebody walking by is going to see that and, well, what's behind there? Cyber criminals are the same way, and so if you don't have security measures and safeguards in place, if you're not locking your doors and windows, so to speak, the folks that are opportunistic are going to come by and they're going to find you at some point. But something else that's notable about small businesses is they still have sensitive data. I don't know too many small businesses before that don't have customer data, personal information, potentially payment information for their customers or their vendors, or other organizations that they interact with, or even like internal, just kind of sensitive information about the business or their field that might be valuable to a competitor. So, in small business, I think, keeping that in mind, folks can kind of understand that security is everyone's responsibility in the org. It's not just like the owner's responsibility, or it's not just the IT person's responsibility, because everybody's got to kind of keep an eye out. And a big piece of that is the social engineering that cyber criminals will do. And that's a really, really fancy word that we
Hmm.
use in the field, social engineering. What what is that? Can you kind of explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite tactics that we use in the field to trick people into giving us information, data, access that they're not supposed to be giving us. Essentially, social engineering is just being able to compromise a person psychologically into, like I said before, handing over access, data, anything that we would like access to. Google actually just got breached through social engineering. So we don't always have to be using like fancy tools or coding anything to cause a breach. We could literally just pinpoint someone that we deem as like a weak target within a company, someone that may not be as aware of security, or a phishing email, a malicious email. And we can send that to them, have them, click a link, log into a malicious portal, and boom, we have complete access of all of your sensitive data just from psychologically manipulating you.
And you mentioned email there, because that's still one of the biggest ways that cyber criminals do this. And what we call business email compromise is one of the biggest drivers of cyber events still. As a penetration tester, like if you put on your hacker cap here, why is it important to cyber criminals to compromise somebody's email as a way to attack the company? Like what can they do with that?
They can actually do a lot. It's somewhere we can get the CEO. Usually the CEO is one of like, a prime target because they're not as aware. And we can do spear phishing emails as well to target a specific department within a company because we've done OSINT, we've done our research to craft the perfect email that would trick someone, and they look at that email and they think, oh, this is legitimate. Okay, we deal with this information, we deal with this company. It's all about gaining trust. We're trying to gain trust from the target. And email is usually one of the easiest ways to do that because everyone is using email. Everyone is emailing back and forth all day. And so if we're able to craft a legitimate looking email for someone within a company, that is an easy open door for us to get in.
And I think too, having access in a business email compromise setting where the attacker actually gains access to somebody's email addresses have become an identity anymore. Like just about
Hmm.
every system everywhere, your username that you log in with is your email address now. And so you gain access to somebody's email inbox and you kind of can become them
Hmm.
very easily. Or like you said, you can send emails to attack other folks. Like you could send phishing emails to somebody
Multiple.
in their actual contact list from their actual email, which
Hmm.
then makes it really difficult for that recipient to detect that this isn't actually my friend or my
Hmm.
coworker emailing me. This is somebody else, but they're using that person's actual email box
Hmm.
to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, it's very, very dangerous, and that's how a lot of ransomware and things end up happening.
Hmm.
Folks send email, compromise somebody's email inbox and send it. Um,
Yeah.
and other types of, social engineering that are really, really common, at least that I'm seeing lately. The SMS gift card scams is
Hmm.
big. Social media scams, something
Hmm.
that's really new that's come up is like the AI voice emulation scams. Those are particularly scary because the tools and the technology that have developed to a point where it's kind of trivial to clone somebody's voice. You don't need
Hmm.
a very large sample of them talking
Hmm.
and of their voice to then clone it. And it makes it difficult for people on the phone if they call with this to determine is this really them. Like it puts you in a position now where if somebody calls you, you may have to like somehow verify their identity, especially if they're asking for like money or it's like pushing some urgent thing. With social engineering, there's a element of urgency that is kind of a red flag. And that's something I like to tell people is like if something's coming in an email or an SMS or social media or a phone call or what have you, and they're pushing you to do something and you need to do it quickly. And they're trying to encourage you to maybe not do the things you normally would do to verify identity or check things. That can kind of be an indicator that urgency is pretty consistent with social engineering scams. But you mentioned another term there, OSINT.
Yes.
Could you explain that just a little bit? What is OSINT? And why is it really, really important related to social engineering?
Yes. So OSINT means open source intelligence. It's basically the act of being able to find open source intelligence online. So, or, just anywhere. We could go and investigate people that you may know, but a lot of us will sit and do research on things that you post online. We'll go look at your Instagram, your Facebook. We'll go look at LinkedIn and see who you're connected to. um, we're basically scanning the web for any personal information to be able to craft the specific attack that we want to give us the access that we want. So we like to educate people on what they don't need to be posting online, what they can post online, and to be cautious about where they post where they work, or their children, or any identifiable place in the background. Be cautious of that, because attackers are using that to build a profile, so it's easier to target you.
And it takes very, very little
Very little.
information, a
Hmm.
surprising little amount,
Yes.
to put together a story that
Hmm.
sounds really plausible and convincing, to then get your foot in the door and continue to like escalate access. I mean, it could be
Hmm.
something as simple as seeing that the CEO of the company is posting pictures on Facebook of their vacation
Yeah.
in real time, and you know that they're on vacation right now.
Hmm.
And maybe some other information that you find about them, maybe some names of other folks, or a project you know that the company has been working on. And for a hacker to see that, those few little tiny pieces of publicly posted information, that open source intelligence, could be combined to then call somebody in the company posing as the CEO, right? Like,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm on vacation. I don't have my work laptop, but this big project that we're working on, this super important thing, we need to get some information over to this person at this other company that we're working with on this. Can you send information to so and so?" But that person or the contact information they give may not be legit, to trick somebody into sending information out of the company. Um, yeah, it's scary how little open source information really is necessary. Like, what do you recommend for folks to keep in mind then about like what they're posting online and other things, just to, I don't know, help reduce this risk?
Yeah. So just limit what you post. I tend to not post my kid as much. I'll post them here and there, because AI is out and they're doing malicious things with people's faces with AI. So just limit what you post. As far as like traveling, and if you are somewhere, posting after the fact. I know a lot of people like to do that. They like to, instead of posting in real time, they'll wait until after they left the place to post that they've been there. For someone that is or owns a small business, I would recommend regularly auditing your organization's online footprint. So, just looking through the employees and what they're posting. If they do have LinkedIn, and you can kind of use that as a starting point to audit, what's being posted, see if they're posting their badges, or, going places with their badges on. And yeah, just being careful about how you post, when you post, how much information, stuff like that.
And something just occurred to me too. One of the safeguards that I often recommend to companies as we're building their security programs is to have some checks and balances in their process for what
Hmm.
they post on social media for the
Yeah.
company.
Hmm.
And a lot of them already, may look at social media content from the standpoint of like, is this aligned with our business and our brand? Is it going to make us look good? Is there anything risky about this from a public relations standpoint? But to
Hmm.
then add into that also, are we posting information that could be used against us in some way, not from a PR bad press standpoint, but just from a security standpoint, and thinking like, are we sharing too much information? Um,
Hmm.
so for all of this that we've talked about, like email security obviously is a huge piece of this. What are some things you recommend that folks do in order to kind of improve their email security in their organizations?
I would say, first off, by separating your work and personal accounts. You don't want to
Yes.
you don't want to have your business and your personal email working in tandem. That is not right. And I would also say have MFA set up for personal and business accounts. And I had one of my clients, she was allowing one of her or her assistant have access to her business account, to her personal account. And we told her, she doesn't have to have complete access to your account and have that much, access. You can actually create like give her limited access by making her like a delegate to where she can't change anything. She can't go into like the settings and alter anything, see any personal information. She would just be able to send emails, manage the email account, the email section of the account, and not be able to go into the settings and change, delete, do anything with that. But highly recommend separating that and having a business and a personal account.
That really is huge. And it can be partially just from a business, like, optics standpoint that using a personal email, especially if like Gmail or Yahoo or something like that,
Mhm.
for the business, for really small orgs, yes, they're free, but, there's maybe a legitimacy optics issue there where folks see it and it's like, is this a real business? Uh,
Yeah.
but something else that I've also seen is if folks lose access to that
Mhm.
email address, Google, Yahoo, those big free email providers, sometimes they're pretty limited in the options and recourse they give you if for whatever reason they suspend your account. If somebody compromises it and sends a
Mhm.
bunch of phishing emails from your account and they suspend you for this kind of activity, you could end up locked out of the account that you were using for business and that all your business contacts know and are communicating with. And then we talk about phishing a few times or mentioned phishing a few times as we were talking through that. What are some things they should look for to identify phishing emails and things they did, folks just need to be careful of or aware of just when they're using email day to day?
Sure. So, one of the things that you should look for when it comes to analyzing malicious emails, we have this trick where, well, first, analyze the domain, like where is it coming from? Because that can be a clear indication that this is not someone that should be sending you an email. So, always check the email domain and who it's coming from first. And then once you get to the body of the email, they'll probably have a link in there. You don't want to just rush and click the links. You want to analyze the email, read through it, and then hover your mouse over the link, and it will show you the full link and where it would be taking you. And a lot of the times, that link that you click on could take you to a malicious site that can harvest your login credentials, and that would give them full access to your email unless you have MFA set up and then they can't get past, that extra layer of security. But it could also install malicious software onto your device. So we always educate our clients to analyze the email. Don't be hasty. Don't click anything too fast, and just to analyze it. But we also have tools in place to catch any spam or malicious emails, and we analyze them first before we allow our clients to interact with it.
And everybody does this stuff in their browsers these days. Like the
Hmm.
browser is for most people kind of their window into the internet and all of the apps, especially in small business with software as a service applications being so prevalent these days, um, cloud services. What are some things that folks need to be aware of in their browsers specifically, to kind of stay safe? Are there any settings or things that they should look at?
So, as far as browser vulnerabilities, you can actually install malicious extensions within your browser. And they can just go through and steal credentials. They can, log your activity silently and you wouldn't even know. So I highly recommend for people to watch the certain extensions that they like to, add to their browsers. Um, Certain sites can be malicious or vulnerable to cross-site scripting. You can go there and they would be able to, harvest your credentials that way, by going to malicious sites. But also one of the biggest things is just keeping your browser updated, because if it's not updated, you could be just opening yourself up to, thousands of vulnerabilities because you're not updating your browser. So that's one of the things that I like to educate small businesses on, in the beginning, is just making sure that you're keeping your browser updated. And then from there, anything that you're installing in the browser, make sure you're doing thorough research on what you're installing, because that could be an open door into just leaking data from there.
Where you get the software from is really, really important. Especially in a small business environment where maybe you don't have a lot of enterprise grade, large business grade tools on the network to help detect and prevent and block things. Um,
Hmm.
with Windows, we've got the Windows App Store on um, Apple devices. We've got the app stores from Apple, and if you download software from those, one of the reasons I love doing that is one, it's really easy because you find it in the App Store. There's been some level of vetting for these software apps that have been added to the App Store, but also over time, because you install it through the App Store, it keeps it up to date for you, or it can,
Yes.
which is really, really useful. But if the app you need isn't there, like being extra careful that you're going to the official site to download that app, so you're not getting some rogue version of an application or a browser plugin or something, really, really is key. And you mentioned keeping browsers up to date, and modern browsers have settings as well in them these days that help with some of that. Like there are some anti-phishing settings
Hmm.
in browsers that, generally are on by default, but it's always good to double check to make sure your browser's anti-phishing settings are turned
Yes.
on and that the privacy settings and tracking protection settings are also turned on. And there's different levels to those, and you kind of have to read the descriptions of those and decide like how strict do I want to
Yes.
be on those settings? Like, do I want to crank it up to 10, or is like, 6.5 or 7 good enough? Um,
Yes.
but as you crank it up to 10, things break. You start going to websites and it's like, hey, we use ads to get paid. Can you turn off your ad blocker when you access our site? Or you may go
Hmm.
to other sites where it just flat out doesn't load. Like I've run into that with like platforms like Twitter or X, where you turn that up too high
It'll
and all of a
break
sudden
it.
just your feed won't even load.
Yeah.
Uh, so you got to back off a little bit. So there's a little bit of adjustment that folks may have to do there with some of those levels. Just be aware on some of these settings when you turn them on, like it might change the behavior of the software enough that you might have to go back and adjust.
Hmm.
There's another feature in browsers these days. It's the private browsing window or the incognito windows. And those are cool, but they're not necessarily, I think, what a lot of people think they are. Can you talk
Hmm.
about those just a little bit about like what they're good for, but like what they're not also?
Yeah, so the private incognito windows are not, I know a lot of people think that they are just masking everything that you're doing online, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
I would say that they're mostly good for not tracking like your cookies, or, storing, that part of, because, a small lesson on cookies is, when you go to a site, it'll, store everything that you've been, clicking on and viewing on that site, and it'll store it in your browser. So next time you go to that site, it's easier to open up. That's what the private browser is, keeping from getting tracked and, stored over time. But as far as like, if you are thinking about searching up something malicious or doing something, illegal, it is not going to keep you from getting tracked and being found out by law enforcement. They're going to be able to find that footprint,
Yeah.
of what you're doing in that private browser. So it's not as private as you think that it is, in simple terms.
And we talked about links and checking links and that kind of stuff uh, before with browser security. And that also goes in with email security. There's a new kind of link that's becoming really, really popular lately, and they are super, super convenient. I'm not part of the crowd that says never use QR codes, uh,
Mhm.
because some people say, "Oh, you should never use QR codes because you have no idea, what you're clicking and those kinds of things because it's not human readable." Uh,
Right.
but they can be really, really useful in certain contexts, or if you trust, have a certain level of trust in the person who's sending the QR code to you, like in packaging for something that you just purchased to go find the instruction manual or the setup instructions or thing. Like some of that stuff's really, really useful. Or potentially, if you're traveling or something and need to pull something off of your ticket or whatever. Like if you know that's an official thing,
Mhm.
there's not a problem with that. But how can folks maybe be careful and make sure they're using QR codes to take advantage of the convenience of it, but do it in a way that's like careful enough that they're maybe could catch when somebody's trying to use one maliciously?
Yes, I actually was very cautious because you know that I was just in Vegas for DEF CON, one of the largest hacking conventions in the world. And there was a bunch of random QR codes just stuck around the convention center. And it's a place where a bunch of hackers are. I did not scan any of those QR codes because you never know like what we could be putting up somewhere. So I would say like in an airport, if there's a QR code in the airport, I'll scan that because I know that I'm in a place where, okay, this is a legitimate place. They're giving me information. I'm going to scan this, this is fine. But if you're just in a random outing or a random place and you see a QR code or someone online they have a QR code in the back of their, just random and it's not somewhere that you trust or you have a long-term relationship, this is a legitimate company, I would not scan that. I'd be very cautious on scanning it. I just wouldn't scan it at all. But somewhere like an airport, hospital, a business that you've worked with for a long time, yes, I would say scan the QR code. But other than that, no, I just would not.
I've seen examples where folks will put a malicious QR code, like a sticker, on
Mm-hmm.
top of an actual one. Like I've seen
Yes.
examples that, clips on, YouTube and shorts or TikTok or whatever going around where like on the parking stuff, like scan this to pay for your parking in the
Yes.
parking app in, towns because they've gotten rid of meters. So they don't have to
Mm-hmm.
pay people to go collect all the cash, the change out of meters all the time. But, like, you can look at those too, I think, and you can tell, like, is that QR code actually part of the sign, or was that a sticker that's been put over top? Like, just
Yeah.
kind of paying attention to little stuff like that can help, as well. And like links, you can hover over them in email. It's a little harder with QR codes. Like, I know the
Yes.
camera on my phone will show, here's the link it's going to,
It's
but
very
it's
short.
maddening because it's truncated on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
camera. I can't see the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
And so if you can't see the whole thing, it is
Don't.
really
Yeah.
difficult to
Mm-hmm.
verify. And so if your camera app or whatever your app using to scan it won't show you the whole link, it kind of breaks that trick, and maybe it's better to be on the careful side there.
Yeah. Stickers, I would say stickers, be a little bit more analytical, investigate more. If it's on a
Mhm.
screen, if the QR code is on a screen, I'll typically scan it because, it's in a official place. I don't think a hacker would unless they're a very skilled hacker and can switch that out.
That is entirely possible. Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, very careful with the stickers.
And I think if we switch gears just a little bit, folks, when they click these links, a lot of times we talked about phishing, and you mentioned that they want to harvest your login credentials, a
Mhm.
fancy way of saying your username, your password, and
Mhm.
those kinds of things. We probably should talk about password security here a
Mhm.
bit too, because this also plays a big role in this. And so, like, we know folks need to use, strong passwords, and they shouldn't reuse passwords, uh, those kinds of things. They should use MFA. So let's talk about that a little bit. When we tell somebody to use a strong password, what's that mean? And what's ways that they can kind of easily come up with? strong passwords, but that they're still usable?
I like to recommend my clients, anyone that I know, to use a password manager. I see a lot of people, they complain about, when they go and sign up for an account, the web page is telling them their password's not strong enough. They're trying to protect you. You want to have a strong password. So, password managers take out that stress of creating that strong password for you and storing them in a very secure database. So, there's that way. And then the second way, if you feel like password managers are too hard, I like to tell people, if you have a very strong memory, or if you want to write them down somewhere that you can keep safe, use like a phrase, like a cool phrase that only you know in your mind, but like switch the letters and then, to numbers or symbols, and make it unique to only what you know. Same way a password manager would do, but if you don't feel comfortable using a password manager, come up with a phrase. It could even be as simple as "I love my cat, Lucy." But you go in and switch those letters around and make like a cryptic message that would make it harder for me to come in and crack.
And when you say crack the password, that is basically using computer software tools, right? To sort of try
Yes.
to guess, but it's guessing in a methodical way
Mhm.
where it's trying one and then it changes a letter or a
Mm.
number and it
Yep.
tries again and again. And the longer your password is,
The
the
longer it's going to
longer it
take.
takes somebody to do this. And so we're
Mhm.
at a point now where as long as your passwords are more than 12 or so characters, 12 to 16 characters or whatever,
Yes.
generally you're safe enough that the amount of time it would take somebody to crack your password may not be
It wouldn't be
worth
worth
it
it.
to them
Yeah.
because of the amount of time it would take to try every possible combination of letters, numbers, symbols, those those kinds of things. Um,
Yes.
I love the idea of phrases because it makes something you can type and you can remember it and you can
Mhm.
enter it and you don't have to rely on a password manager to do that. Um, I use a password manager pretty much for everything. I don't know any of my passwords. I know like a
No.
couple of them. I know the one to my password manager, but
Yeah.
outside of that, like, everything else is and it's all random. Like, it's all, like,
Mhm.
really long 20 to 32 character random stuff, like and it, really sucks if I actually have to manually enter that password somewhere.
Yes, cuz
Um, yeah, if I need to log into a streaming service or something, having to enter that, like, on the TV box or whatever with the remote is a bit of a pain, so, like,
Mhm.
maybe for those, I don't do something totally random to make it a little
Yeah.
easier. But yeah, password managers are awesome for
Yes,
that.
they
They're
are.
some of the best security tools that folks can implement, and they're generally pretty affordable and pretty easy to deploy
And
in a
use.
small business, which is good. And then, we talk about password reuse, and that basically you have a password or a few passwords that you use in multiple places. And yes, it makes it easier to remember,
Mhm.
but there's some dangers that come with that. As from a hacker standpoint, why do hackers like it when people do this?
Well, that would make it just easier for us to go and breach other accounts. We can, if we know that we can get one or two accounts open, that means that, oh, there might be a third one, there might be a fourth. Let me go try this one here. Let me go. And then that ties back into OSINT. You can even do OSINT on the type of software or databases or tools that you might use within your small business. And if you've used this password for these multiple accounts, that means that I could probably use this across everything else that you're using in your business and get access that way. So it's not a good idea to use the same password across multiple different accounts.
And since we talked about how email addresses kind of become your username, your identity,
Mhm.
if one of the companies that you use gets breached
Yeah.
and the hackers release information of the usernames and passwords that they got out of that system and
Mhm.
your email is in there and you use that same password other places, it's not a secret anymore.
No,
Like
it's
that's
not.
now a known thing. And so by
Mhm.
not reusing the passwords, you at least limit it to they only get access to that one system. with that
Mhm.
password instead of potentially multiple or everything,
Yes.
which is a scary thought.
Very scary, very expensive at the end.
Yes. And you mentioned some folks may not necessarily want to go to the complexity of using password managers. I don't recommend folks use like text files, Excel files, things like that. Um, even putting a password on like an Excel file or something like that, and
No.
keeping your passwords in the level of security. If somebody happened to get access to your computer and somehow get a copy of that file, it's not enough protection to feel comfortable using
No.
that. And a lot of people that may not wanna go to the complexity of password managers may also potentially not even think to password protect the
Mhm.
Excel file or that text file. So if somebody gets access to your computer, they potentially have now all of your usernames and passwords, and that could be digital too. They just have to get a copy of the file. They don't actually have to physically have access to your
No.
computer. And because of that, like, especially for folks who maybe aren't super tech savvy, recommended this for folks like my grandparents, for instance, who
Mhm.
they need to be able to use the internet, but they don't need the complexity of all of these extra tools because their use cases are simple enough
Mhm.
that that's overkill. And so I've
Yes.
recommended write it down, like
Yes.
in a notebook or something. Maybe keep it in a locked desk drawer.
Mhm.
Um, it's a double-edged sword
Yeah.
because you gotta protect that, but at
Mhm.
the same time, somebody who's online isn't gonna be able to access your physical password book that's in your
Mm-mm.
locked desk drawer. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? I know that one is a little contentious in the industry. Wanted to get your perspective on that as well.
I think it's a great, alternative to the password manager, especially for, like you said, for older people. They're not as tech savvy, and so I think the writing it down in a journal. And I feel like older people also are really good at keeping up with, their keys, and putting something in a safe place. So as like you said, as long as they have that key and no one knows that that key can unlock that drawer and get into that drawer, then they're safe. If and that's why I said like a safe, because then it gets to the point where you might be dealing with someone really crazy and they just destroy, the desk or whatever to get to this book. But typically it's not that extreme. And I think that as long as you keep the key safe, your passwords are safe.
I feel like it's a good balance,
Yes.
of kind of right sizing your security safeguards to your personal risk profile, or
Yes.
in the, industry, we use the fancy term, your threat model.
Yeah.
Um, but basically it's the risks, the things that you're worried about happening in your specific situation. And it can be a good fit for some people in some situations. And we talk about multi-factor authentication. And like this is another thing that is it's like at the top of the list of like the one thing that you could potentially do to protect yourself, like that can make the biggest impact, is just enabling that multi-factor, that two-step
Yeah.
authentication on any system that you access that potentially has important or sensitive information.
Hmm.
And that, could go way beyond like your bank
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, but just enabling it so important. From a hacker's perspective, why is it so important? Like, what does that second factor do? Why is it such a big deal that people do that?
Yes. So if we are able to,
Hackers hate this one trick.
yes, we do. They do. Cyber criminals hate this one trick.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. If there's only one, that just gives them access to everything. You've basically said, okay, I know this password, I can get in. I can, But if you have a second layer of authentication to let the system know, oh, okay, this is really this person, that will keep us from getting in, or cyber criminals from getting in, because they have to verify, oh, they have this code on this specific app and they put in this code. Okay, this is really this person. MFA, multi-factor authentication, it drives me crazy because sometimes it's a lot. I have to go put in the password, then I got to go to another app and I got to get the code. It's a lot, but it does keep cyber criminals from just gaining that first initial access into your accounts, and it blocks them from getting access to sensitive data anywhere else. So you want to make sure you have that in, because even if they are trying to get in, you'll probably get a notification in your email or somewhere in the authentication app and telling you, or a text message saying, "Hey, we have this login activity at this time. This is you. Prove that it's you, verify that it's you, and then we'll let you in. If it's not you, then that's letting you know, okay, someone is trying to get into my accounts." So that's why you want that in there.
And there's multiple ways that
Yes.
companies will implement multi-factor authentication. And so banks often still send you a text message
Mhm.
with a code when you go to log in. So you have to have your username and password, but you also have to have your phone in order to
Mhm.
receive the text message to put it in. And I think a lot of times they do that because they're trying to meet sort of the lowest common denominator. They feel
Mhm.
really confident at this point that anybody who's doing banking with them is going to have a phone that can receive a text
Yes.
message. And so that's
Mhm.
a safe way to implement it to get as close to 100% coverage from a technical implementation standpoint as possible. And then, instead of using an authenticator app, which now requires a smartphone
Mhm.
with an app installed, and the person has to know how to use the app, set it up, and those
Yeah.
kinds of things. So the barrier is higher, but it's a
Mhm.
stronger way of doing
Yes.
it. So obviously, SMS, text message based is,
Mhm.
way better than nothing. Better than that is to go with an authenticator app. Those authenticator apps are great, and they can do push notification methods as well. I recommend that folks still use a method that requires actually entering in a number, because it
Yes.
puts the person and their brain in the loop,
Mhm.
and it's not just a muscle memory tap. Something else I see with passwords and user accounts in small businesses a lot, small businesses especially, who are beginning their security journey, is they've got shared accounts. They want to save the $20 a month subscription to something, and everybody shares one Canva account. But I've also seen it where they share one login to the cash register system or something, and everybody logs into the point of sale system with the same code, um,
Mhm.
and the same account, and that can be a little bit dangerous. So I think we
Very
should talk a little
dangerous.
bit about making sure in a business context that you've got unique accounts
Mhm.
for each person who are going to need to access things,
Mhm.
as opposed to password sharing. And in cases where password sharing really truly is necessary, like maybe how they can go about doing that. So I guess let's start with unique accounts, like from the cyber criminal perspective. Like, why is unique accounts so important, and sharing accounts so dangerous?
Yeah. So if I find out, a cyber criminal finds out that everyone is using the same, login and account for accessing sensitive information, that means that no one's going to track me. No one there in the log in the activity, it's all going to show the same. Like, it's not going to tell me or tell you as a business owner, "Oh, such and such came in at this time and they were doing this activity, and then this person came in at this time and they did this activity." Everyone's under the same account, so it shows as one person doing everything at the same time. So it's hard to see or track who did what. And so if a cyber criminal comes in and they just, transferred $5,000 to their account, it'll probably be way more than that if you have more money, but you would know because you have the same account for everyone in the organization. And that's why password security is also great in multi factor authentication, because if I find out that I can get in, um, through one account, I wonder how many other accounts I can get into that will give me the same level of access. So that's why it's important to implement role based access throughout your company within your employees so that you can track the activity of who did what at what time. to reduce the attack vector of a potential cyber criminal coming in and having access to data that they're not supposed to.
And reducing that attack vector is really key here, especially with role-based access. Like if each person's access is granted with the appropriate level of permissions for
Hmm.
their role. As somebody who works in a particular job function in the company versus somebody else, they're going to have different levels of access to different systems as appropriate for their role. Versus when you're sharing accounts, if those two people have to share an account now, your account permissions are now the account has permissions to everything.
Yeah.
It's that superset of what each of them need. One of the ways that I sort of present this is it's not about not trusting your people when it comes to role-based access. And this is really, really important. It's not about not trusting your people. It's about if something happens and somebody who's not supposed to have access has to gets access to that one account, have you at least limited what they can access to just what maybe that one person needed instead of everything. And so it
Right.
becomes a reducing the blast radius more
Hmm.
so than we're not doing this because we don't trust you. We're doing this because if something happens to the account,
Right.
we want to limit what somebody could do with that. And so tricks then or tricks techniques for sharing accounts safely. Password managers are great for
Yes.
this. Um, can you talk a little bit about that and why somebody would want to use a password manager for this and how that actually lets them do it in at least as safe a way possible?
Yeah, because with the password manager, they don't have to see the password. Um, you can just get, like, if they have that same password manager, you can share the password with them. They wouldn't be able to see the password, but you can share the login information with them, and they'd be able to log in without ever, seeing that password. That really helps to protect, just having exposure, because if they can't see it, all they can do is log in. That prevents them from knowing that information.
And if they leave the company,
They don't know
you
it.
can revoke that. They
Yes.
never knew it. You
Mhm.
can revoke it from their password manager account, but if they're using a
Mhm.
business password manager, you're going to take away their access when they leave to that anyway.
Right.
And you don't necessarily have to then change that password every
No.
time somebody leaves because operationally, back in the old days of IT, like I remember people leaving before password managers, this password sharing wasn't quite as easy. And
Mhm.
in organizations where somebody would leave, it's like, great, now we got to go change this password on
Mhm.
a bunch of different systems, and we had to keep track of where all those systems were and who had access to them. There was a lot of operational overhead in order to do that and stay on top of it, that having unique accounts instead of shared accounts and being able to share passwords without actually exposing them, like, really reduces risks when you have staff turnover as well, which happens in small business. Folks,
Mhm.
come and go. It happens in every business. It's not just small
Mhm.
businesses, obviously, but it's just part of what happens through over the course of a year, a couple years, whatever, and you got to be ready for it. So we've covered password stuff pretty well. We probably should talk about stuff that folks can actually do on their computer, whether it's their personal computer or if it's a work computer that they have as a small business owner, or just in general, the small business owner should be thinking like we should do this to all of the computers that the company owns. What are some things that folks can do on their computers that are going to make it much, much harder for a cyber criminal to gain access to the system or gain access to the information on the system?
Yeah. So you guys can require authentication, which involves having a password, a PIN, or anything biometric. You could set a screen lockout time, device encryption that could be either BitLocker or FileVault. You can run a device firewall, running anti-malware software that will run 24/7. And you would also want to use managed accounts or cloud accounts that will remotely locate or remote lock or wipe in case you lose your device.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few things. Like, I think a lot of folks these days, they generally will have the authentication on the laptop where they log in. They've got to put a PIN or a fingerprint or something to access the system. Uh, but the screen timeout isn't necessarily something that everybody thinks to do. So that, like, I feel like that is really important. Like, if you've stepped away from your computer, that after 10 minutes or 15 minutes that would lock, and if somebody comes up to it, they would still have to authenticate again. It helps keep somebody from getting physical access to the system while it's just sitting there. Device encryption stuff you mentioned, those features, just double checking to make sure they're enabled by default. Like, in most devices these days, your phones, your computers and stuff, those are going to be enabled by default, but you can't guarantee it unless you double check. So that's something to check on. And also to make sure that the device firewall hasn't been disabled, because that's another thing that
Yes.
thankfully the software companies have these features built in and they're enabled by default,
Hmm.
but you can go in and disable them. And sometimes folks will do that if they're having trouble getting something to work. Now it's turned off. If you end up outside of your office environment, have a secure, you're at a coffee shop or something, now that could be a problem. So making sure that those are turned on as well, and going into the security settings or the security center is where you would generally find that. Um, Running anti-malware software, like, most folks know about antivirus software at this point, but like antivirus, Microsoft Windows has Defender built in. If you've got a Mac OS has XProtect built in, as long as it's enabled. So again, you want to make sure that these things are enabled. In a small business environment, though, those aren't managed services. So each individual computer is like its own little island. And so a lot of times will recommend to my clients to use a managed, like a business grade thing where each of the computers, they run that security software and it connects back to a central kind of management system that allows them to see, is it enabled? Is it up to date? Did it detect anything? Or potentially be able to, click something to actually respond if it did detect something, to take some sort of action against it. So those services are really important these days to have that business grade anti-malware software. In small businesses, especially, you mentioned a monitored service. Like, that's something I fully agree. It is so, so important because if you've got somebody who sees this stuff day in and day out, monitoring it for you, and it's not that expensive, to
No,
get a
no.
monitored service. Those folks, when something's detected, they've seen this before. Whereas if you're not using a monitored service, if something's detected, it's very likely the first time you've ever seen it. And as
Yep.
a small business owner, if your core expertise is not cybersecurity, you're at a real disadvantage there. So having somebody monitoring that knows how to respond and can contact you and say, "Hey, something was detected. We need to do this, this, and this." That it's hugely, hugely helpful. And I think your tip about managed accounts is spot on as well. Having an Apple account or a Microsoft account, um, Apple Business Manager, Microsoft M365, or even if it's just, Google on a personal device, a Google account, a Microsoft account, an Apple account, Apple ID that you log into your system with. By using that, you now have a way that if the device isn't in your control, you can still change the password. Or, like you said, have a hope at doing a remote lock and wipe. Without a managed account, you have no recourse if the machine disappears
No.
at that point. So I think that's a fantastic tip. So outside of the computer itself, I mentioned connecting to a Wi-Fi network at a coffee shop.
Yes. Lots of small business owners love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and they generally are setting up Wi-Fi networks in their office,
Hmm.
or at home if they're working from home. What are some things that folks need to know? Just the fundamental things that they need to do when they're setting up their Wi-Fi network at home, at a small office.
When you're at home, when you get your Wi-Fi router, it typically comes with a default password. You want to go in and immediately change that because that default password can be used for anyone if they don't change it. So they would be able to log into your Wi-Fi and have access to your home network. So immediately change your default password when you're setting up at home. You want to enable a guest network and make sure that you have Wi-Fi encryption turned on, WPA2. You don't want to be using anything WPA that is easily crackable. I've been able to crack that before. I don't even think they allow us to connect to WPA or web anymore, do they?
Yeah, WEP has been long broken. I know,
Okay,
like, I'm
yeah.
not even sure that that's supported, like, it might still be available, but yeah, that one is
It's uh,
WEP specifically is one you definitely don't wanna use,
no.
and if you've got a Wi-Fi router that's really, really old and you've just never changed it,
Yeah. Please get rid of it.
yes.
I would say don't set up DMZ hosts or forwarding.
Yeah, the DMZ host, for folks that may not know what that is, that's where you can set up in your router a particular system on your network that is sort of going to be presented to the internet. And you can run that, use that to run like a web server or something um, on your network. Where I see this a lot though is people will do that to run a Plex server. A Plex is software for like media hosting. And they want to have their media library that they have in Plex internally to call up on their TV, for instance, to
Hmm.
watch a movie. Plex has features that if you turn on some port forwarding and stuff, you could access it from outside of your network if you're traveling at a hotel and watch your own movies off of your own, Plex server in your house. But you have to be really careful with that because if somebody happens to get access to that Plex server through some bug or vulnerability in that app,
Hmm.
now they have access on a machine in your network that they
Yep.
can connect to other machines in your network, and they can start scanning, and they can potentially try to run exploits to take advantage then of vulnerabilities that they might find if you haven't kept all of the computers in your network up to date. They may be able to move and get access to other systems. The DMZ host thing is really important, especially for folks that work from home and
Hmm.
have family members, maybe teenagers or college age folks, kids that are still living at home who are tech savvy, who are playing games or want to run a game server, want to run a Plex server, those kinds of things. Just to make sure that you're not setting up that kind of stuff or that nobody else in your network is setting up that kind of stuff. And that's where changing
Yes.
that default password is
Hmm.
important because your whole family shouldn't know that password to be able to go in and change these things or anybody else in your office necessarily. And that default passage password, especially, that's always really well known. And I like your suggestion about the guest network too, because then when you have company over, you don't have to give them access to your main Wi-Fi where your computer and your work computer and other things may be. They have access to the guest network, which is just internet.
Yes.
And so you don't have to worry. And again, it's not because you don't trust your friend, but if they plug their computer, what if their computer has been compromised
Yeah.
and now they connect to your network? And now that person who has access to their computer can say, "Oh, hey, here's a new network. I'm going to see what's here."
And you run a business, so you have to be mindful and cautious about who's getting access to that your business data.
And protecting the data, the technical protections that we do with, turning on these features we just talked about in the computer, making sure your Wi-Fi network is set up, like that's part of the picture. But we also have to protect data in other ways through just how we use it, how we interact with it. From your perspective, why is how they handle the data important? And like what are some things that they should be keeping in mind when it comes to like handling the data?
You want to, especially when it comes to like confidential and restricted data, in regards to like HIPAA, healthcare, and stuff like that, payment, information. You don't want that data getting out in the wrong hands. So you want to make sure you're handling this sensitive data accordingly. And you can look into mechanisms like secure file sharing and, specific file sharing platforms versus, just sending things out through email because you just never know who's going to send what to what. So make sure that you are only sharing data and information with people who have permission.
And those file sharing tools too, I think having those identified is like this tool is okay to share this kind of information. And, in a lot of companies that I work with, Google Workspace, SharePoint, OneDrive, like the company has standardized on a tool. If you need to share information, use that tool, use the sharing features, only share it, like you said, with the specific person who needs access, or maybe a specific group, and use the groups feature in the tool to help ensure that only those people have access. And that's all about protecting data from unauthorized access and that sort of thing. But we also can protect data from loss because, like, that's also really important. You know, what do you recommend for folks to do when they're trying to protect data from being lost in some way? And from a cyber criminal standpoint, like what are things that the cyber criminals actually want to see if they're looking to inflict harm or pain on a company?
Definitely backups. If you run into a situation where you run into a cyber criminal, ransomware is typically a vulnerability or an attack on a company to extort them out of funds and threatening them, saying, if you don't pay me this, I am going to take your data and leak it to the public, sell it on the dark web, whatever. So if you have backups and you have updated backups, you can look at that and say, I'm just going to go and restore a backup, and you don't have to pay a ransom. Backups are really great to have in place, not even just for an attack. If you lose data or you mess up a file, or something gets corrupted, you can restore it from the last updated backup.
Ransomware has been a really big problem over the last decade for a lot of organizations. And the real trick then with backups, especially if you're worried about ransomware, an attacker who might try to destroy your backups, is to have backups that are offline. They're
Yes.
offsite. Like they're not in the building, they're not on your network, that if
Hmm.
an attacker gets into your network, they can go delete your backups. Keeping data, like there is a flip side to that though, with data retention and how long you keep data of different types as well. And that can be dangerous. It's something I see with small businesses is a lot of times they'll collect more than they need, especially with
Hmm.
like personal information with like loyalty programs and that kind of stuff. But making sure that you only collect the data that you have a business need for. Sales and marketing is another area that it's really easy to kind of veer into the territory of, well, we don't know exactly what we're going to need, so we're going to collect all this, even though we don't have a use for it now. We're just going to
Hmm.
collect it all now, and then we'll have it for later in case we need it. From a hacker perspective, why would they love it if a business collects all this extra data, just keeps it for forever?
There's many things that we could do with that data, or cyber criminals could do with that data. For instance, if we get credit card information, we get, people's payment information, we can go in and start buying things. We could start using that to for our advantage, or not our advantage, but cyber criminals could use that for their advantage. HIPAA information could be used to target individuals with their health information. We could build up a profile. We can social engineer them easily. It would all tie back into, if I have access to this data, I could use it as leverage to exploit targets. So knowing when and how long to keep data and when to get rid of it will prevent you from that being held over your head. So yeah, the more data that you can not hold and not keep and not get exploited will keep pen testers, cyber criminals from being able to craft very skilled attacks against your clients and customers.
And keep you from having your systems being breached, leading to maybe even identity theft
Yes.
of
Yes.
a customer. or
Yes.
something because they were able to get enough information from you and
Mhm.
maybe combine with some other information somewhere else to be able to now go after individuals. It can
Scary to
be
think about.
scary
Yeah.
and, just these little things that help protect your business, but also help prevent your business from maybe being part of a bigger problem when something bad happens.
That can end up in you losing trust in from your clients, customers, and money overall.
If we switch gears just a little bit away from the technical,
Mhm.
um, and we look at physical security, this is the security of the office or even your
Mhm.
home if you're a home-based worker. From a cyber criminal standpoint, what are your thoughts on physical security and maybe especially for small offices or home-based workers?
Leaving out any sensitive information, not having your documents locked securely somewhere, that gives us more leverage into exploiting you. So you always want to be mindful of anything sensitive that you keep on your desk, around your desk, in your drawers. Highly recommend you, if it's physical, getting a shredder. I think most of us have shredders in this field. I have a shredder right here under my desk. And anytime I am done reading something or dealing with something sensitive, I shred it. Also, credit cards. If you are done with a credit card, I don't care if it's off or you've deactivated or not, still shred it. I never just throw like a full credit card or full, document into the trash. I will shred it.
Something you were mentioning though about homes, folks with home-based workers and like, people in their homes and getting access. Um, that is something that I like to stress for folks too, is like we think of our homes as being a secure space, but I think sometimes that's misplaced because of the familiarity that we
Mm-hmm.
have with our homes. And we don't always think about the guests that may be in the house or our family members' guests that may be in the house at different times, or the
Mm-hmm.
potential that somebody may be able to gain access to the house, breaking and entering, those kinds of things. When your home doesn't have the same level of security that a company facility would, higher grade locks and alarms and cameras and those types of things. Uh, so it is very easy to have that false sense of security in your home, which makes it that much more important to shred stuff and make sure your workspace stays clean. You never know who may go looking for stuff. People have
Yeah.
kids get
Mm-hmm.
nosy. Maybe they're looking for something and they, and they're at your desk and they see something else that they're not supposed to see, or there
Yeah.
might be information there. And then, they talk about that with somebody else, don't realize that that was sensitive. It's very easy to have folks in your house that don't fully understand the responsibility you have for security to your employer. And so keeping your desk clean, keeping stuff shredded is really important. And then outside of your home, when you're at coffee shops and stuff, talk about that just a little bit. Tell our listeners about some of your tips for when folks are in a public environment, coffee shops, hotels, airports, what have you, things to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I typically, in public, I do like to use a VPN on top of, whatever security, this public place has with their Wi-Fi network. I typically like to use VPN to give me that extra layer of obscurity when I'm out in public. If a attacker is on the network, they can't necessarily see, too much into what I have going on. Um, if you do leave your laptop out on the table, I do recommend locking it, locking the screen. And if you trust someone, especially the people that, if you're a regular at a coffee shop, just ask them, hey, I'm going to the restroom. Can you please, watch my laptop while I'm there? Don't just get up and leave it wide open. That's that's scary.
That is scary. And I do understand, like, if you're only gonna be gone for, like, 2 minutes,
Right.
like, to have to pack up the laptop, tear
Hmm.
everything down, take it with you, it is a pain.
It
Um,
is.
that actually is a good transition to sort of the last thing that we wanted to talk about, or kind of topic area we want to talk about, which is incident response, is when stuff does happen, those bad things happen, what do you do? Like,
Mhm.
um, and recognizing and reporting suspicious events and getting up and going to the bathroom in a coffee shop and your laptop gets stolen. That's a great example of this. It's an embarrassing event, but you got to report it, and you kind of got to suck it up and report it quickly so that the business owner or your IT folks can deal with that. Or if you are the business owner, you got to be able to react relatively quickly in those situations. So recognizing and reporting suspicious events is huge. Like that's everybody's job in the company is to be vigilant. If you see something that's not quite right, say something. We've used we've used the term breach, used the term incident, and those kinds of things um, in this episode. I suppose I should define those, huh?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
you know, so when we talk about this, we sort of have three tiers of things. We have events. An event is just something that happened. An incident is an event that impacted had a security impact to the data of some sort. Uh, and then a breach is an incident that has had an impact that has resulted in unauthorized, like disclosure or access of the data uh, by a cyber criminal or something. So we have events that may or may not be a big deal. We have incidents which impact security or impact these systems or information in some way, or we have a breach where like now that's bad, and we have to be careful with the word breach because breach is kind of a loaded word, right? Like there's legal definitions around breach, there's regulatory reporting requirements around breaches that may not, that doesn't exist around an incident. So when you get to the point where you're calling something a breach, you got to be careful with that word in business. But before we get to that, an incident impacting the security of information. And in the industry, we have the CIA triad. Can you explain a little bit about the CIA triad and like how we use it and how folks can frame the different ways that something could be an incident that maybe they wouldn't have thought?
So the CIA triad is a very popular acronym that we use in the security space. So C meaning confidentiality, I meaning integrity, A meaning availability. So when we hop back into the incident, you can have three different types of incidents, or you can have all three. It may be a with confidentiality that is having access to data that you're not supposed to be having access to. So how would you go about handling think about how you would go about handling that situation in an incident or a breach. Integrity would be how legitimate is the information or the data that has been changed or modified within your business. Then availability um, comes into play when it comes to having access to resources within your business. So, how was that impacted, and how would you respond to that in your incident response plan? And making sure that you have a response plan for each of those different factors within the triad will help you respond better and quicker. And that prevents cyber criminals from coming in and having more room to play. You're not responding to them as quickly as you can. That will give them more, power to just keep getting access to things that I'm not supposed to have access to or stopping them from being productive.
That's a really good point. I don't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but the amount of time that it takes on average for most small businesses to detect that they have an unauthorized party in their systems or that something has happened is shockingly long. Like we're talking months.
Yeah.
generally, that somebody may have access to your systems before it's even noticed,
Mhm.
if it's ever noticed. But I like the way you broke down the CIA triad. Like, a lot of times in small businesses, especially my clients, they may have a incident, but it's not a security incident, it's an operational incident. Maybe the system's down. If they're a SaaS provider, their system's down for a little while, their customers can't use it. So we have an availability issue where the customers don't have the availability of the data. So it's still an incident, but it's not a breach. But if you have a ransomware attack, somebody has stolen your data and they've encrypted it, now you've got all three.
Right.
That's why ransomware ends up being so dangerous because it hits all three of those
All 3.
all at
Yeah.
once. So knowing what to do when this happens. Um, and this is another area where I feel like every business is going to be different. Know who to report events to and how to report them. If you see something, don't be trying to figure that out in the moment. Make sure you know that ahead of time. And then also in the organization, the business owner or business leaders should know who's going to lead the response to an incident. When something's reported and it's been determined that, yes, this is an incident, it's a fact affecting one of those three parts of the triad, who takes the lead? And then I think the last thing too is when you've got somebody who's going to take the lead, that in general, that the team members should know is to wait for instructions from that leader and not take actions that they're not instructed to do. Because even actions that seem like a good idea at the time
Yep.
and are well intentioned, when you're dealing with these kind of situations, you can end up making it much more difficult to conduct the forensic investigations that need to be. You can end up maybe just potentially destroying evidence
Mhm.
that needs to be there, or mutating the state of a system so that when the forensics folks are there, it's much harder to tell what was done by the attacker and what was done by somebody in the company in trying to respond to it without, if they didn't record every single step, I have done all of these things. So waiting for instruction is really, really important because it's often most people's first instinct of, oh, I got to kick this person out of the system.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not always the best thing to do. Maybe doing some additional research and stuff first. Like, they're already in your system. They've already had access to the data. A little bit longer is probably not going to increase your risk all that much, but responding too quickly is potentially going to cripple your ability to respond. And it's going to tip them off that they're there, to where maybe they now are able to do something to make it more difficult for you to respond as well. So that's, to me, that's why it's so important that know who to report it to, know who's going to lead it, and then make sure that whoever's leading it is truly the one who is helping to make the decisions in that incident response thing. And as I mentioned too, with that word breach, that's a loaded word.
Very
And
loaded.
if there is a reason to believe that a breach has occurred, legal counsel, like, that needs to be the first call that the business owner or, the security officer, whichever leader is in charge there is making. Because legal counsel is really the one that needs to be involved in determining or declaring an incident as a breach. So very, very, very important there. And that legal counsel also, once you've involved them that early, they can help with managing communications and they can help you make sure that you're maintaining attorney-client privilege. Because if it truly is a breach, your legal counsel is going to have to be working with you through this to deal with the regulatory side and notifying folks as well. Before we step away, do you have any key takeaways that you want to sort of, maybe drive home for our listeners before we wrap up?
I would say always when you're running your business from a cybersecurity perspective, think like a hacker. Think like us. Think about when I'm handling certain data, or I'm, managing certain accounts, or just everyday business task, um, what would a hacker do in this specific, situation? What do I need to put in place to keep, you know, a cyber criminal or a hacker from breaching or getting access to things that they shouldn't have access to? Anyone can think like a hacker. I always encourage people, it's not something that is just something that we do in our profession. It's just that we're specialized in it. But you can also think like a hacker to protect yourself, and to always think about security at the, start of everything. Also, if you can find any type of security awareness training out there for free or for low cost that you can implement within your company to give you more, in-depth security training or awareness, I would say invest into that.
Excellent thoughts. And I think, just to add to that, that it's everybody's responsibility, I think is one of the
Yes.
key things that I just want to remind folks is security isn't just the responsibility of the business owner. It's not
Hmm.
just the responsibility of the IT person. It's not just a technical thing, that it's about everybody, and just being vigilant and understanding what's expected of you and how your specific role and the day-to-day processes and tools that you use can impact and enhance security in the organization. All right. So before we wrap up completely, I want to make sure that we let folks know where they can find you online. So if anybody wants to, reach out, follow up, if they have questions or want to talk to you about pen testing or consulting or anything like that, where should they find you?
Yeah, if you look up the Digital Empress, you can pretty much find me anywhere. I'm on TikTok, Instagram. I do have a website that you guys can visit. It's linked in, most of my social media bios. And I do have an email, thedigitalempress@gmail.com. You guys can reach out if you're interested in getting pen testing or cybersecurity services, or even mentorship. You can reach out to me there and we can get started.
Awesome. I'll make sure I put the links in the show notes so that folks can find you easily. So Uh, and thank you again, Taylor, for joining me on the episode. It has been awesome having you on the show. I think this is going to be another super, super valuable episode for our listeners. And I hope they get
Absolutely.
a lot out of it. And, you're sharing your experience and knowledge, hopefully will help them make their businesses and themselves personally more secure. So thank you. And thank you to our listeners as well. We do the show for you. I know I always say it, but I really truly mean it. Thank you for listening. It's great to have you here. And I also want to thank Michael Cobrin for the amazing theme music for the show. Until next time, I am Accidental CISO. Stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.